Hello and welcome to this video on the art of note taking. This topic comes as a response to a request that I received from a student last week who wanted my insights on how to take effective notes. Now, some of you may be wondering, come on, why do I need a lecture on note taking? This is something that I have been doing since elementary school, right? And yeah, you are not wrong. You have been taking notes most of your school life. And now, here, while in college, a professor is giving you a lecture on note taking. That seems a little odd. But it turns out there is a lot more to note taking than scribbling down words while listening to a lecture or highlighting things in your book that you are reading. There's a lot more to note taking. And that is what we will be discussing in this video. Effective note taking is about engaging with the material. It's about processing the material in a way that it sticks with you, that it sticks in your brain like a glue. Or maybe the glue analogy is not perfect because we want that material to move around as well. We want that material to change also. We want it to be dynamic. But you understand when I'm saying we want a little bit of stickitiveness to the material that you are learning, in the sense that we don't want you to easily forget the material. And more than retention of the material, what is important is we want you to be able to understand the material really well at a deep level, and hopefully even engage in critical thinking, creative thinking. So, how can you do those things effectively? Well, it will depend a lot on how you take your notes. So that's what I'm going to be focusing on in this video. I will share some research evidence on the topic. You would be surprised, but this is an area that has been researched quite well in the literature. And we will go through those insights. I think I'm going to make this into a two-part video. In the first part of the video, I will have this slideshow presentation kind of format. And in the second video, I will do a live session of note taking, so that what you learn here from a more theoretical perspective, you can then see me applying it in the second video. But I would strongly recommend that you watch both the videos. Okay, now let's kick things off with a blast from the past, because this article that I'm sharing with you, this was published way back in 1989. Now, why am I digging up such an old article? Well, because this article provides some important insights into note-taking. And no wonder it has been cited by over 500 other researchers. So it has got a lot of citations, which means it has been an impactful article. So this was a review article, which means the researcher here, Kenneth Cura, he took a deep dive into the research that had been done on the topic until that point of time. And then he writes up this good summary of the main findings about note-taking in this particular article. So, what were those findings? First of all, note-taking matters. It enhances your learning. It improves your learning outcomes, meaning you will have better retention, deeper understanding of the material, you will have improved test performance. Note taking is good. So if you have the habit of not taking notes in a lecture or while reading a book, not a good idea. It's better to take notes than not take notes. But just any kind of notes will not work. If you are taking notes verbatim, meaning just repeating as closely as possible what the professor is saying, that's not a very effective way of note taking. Note taking works better when you modify the lecture. And what do I mean by that? Or what does the author mean by it? You have to write it in your own words, not in the professor's words. You have to give your own spin to it. You can write it in your own style. That's when notes come to life. That's when they help enhance your learning in a big way. So that's a big component of note taking. Now, just taking notes and then letting that collect dust is again not going to help you in a big way. So if you put in so much of effort writing notes, make sure that you are reviewing the notes, you are revisiting them, and when you do that, that's when your learning gets enhanced. The third point that I think was again big in this study was that you need to structure your notes properly. So just writing down notes in a linear fashion is not effective. And what do I mean when I'm saying writing down notes in a linear fashion? When you are reading a book or when you are listening to the lecture, you follow the same sequence that the professor is taking, right? Or you may follow the same sequence that the book describes the topic. So your notes again follow that same linear sequence. But that's not the best way to take notes. What you need to be doing is to be reorganizing that material in a format that makes logical sense to you, in a format that could be creative. It does not and it should not follow that same traditional linear sequence of thoughts as it was presented by the researcher, by the author, or by the professor. Okay, so you have to structure the notes properly, and some of the techniques that I will be sharing with you that emphasizes the structure part really well. Now, the last 2 points are, simple, but again, very important. So your notes work really well if you can connect the material with things that you have learned in the past, or even with topics unrelated to your class, things that you have learned outside the class, for instance. Okay, so the more connections that you make between what you are learning now and the other things that you have learned in the past or outside, that's when what you are learning comes to life. That's when your learning becomes deeper. That's when you are really understanding the material and are ready to apply it well in your life. So this next article we will be going through is from 1991, and again with Cura as one of the authors, the first author here. So Cura, after publishing his 1989 paper that we just discussed, he decides to do his own empirical study, because when he does the literature review, he finds certain gaps in the literature. So he decides to do his own investigation. So he collaborates with a bunch of other researchers and does this study, and again finds something interesting, which is what we will go through now. And this, by the way, also turns out to be a very impactful paper because it also has over 500 citations. So in this study, Cura and his colleagues, they investigate different types of notes, the efficacy of different types of notes and different ways of taking notes. So what are the different types that they investigate? Essentially, three broad types of notes. The first one they call conventional notes. And what do they mean by conventional notes? These are the kind of notes where you are essentially writing down what is being presented in form of either a list or a short paragraph. So you are abbreviating what the professor is saying or what you are reading in the textbook, but it is mostly in a sequential textual format. That is the key aspect here. That is the conventional form of taking notes, right? And you may have seen others doing it, or maybe you yourself have done it. The next form of note taking that they investigate is a linear form of notes. So here it is less of text. There is still text, but now it is a little bit more organized. You have put in some effort to organize the material in form of main topics, subtopics. So it is not just a regular list, but there may be sub bullet points, right? So you have made some effort to organize the material, but it is still following a linear fashion. So the same sequence the lecture was delivered, or the same sequence that you were getting the information exposed to you or through your reading, you are still following that linear pattern. Now, the next kind of notes that Cura and his colleagues discuss are what they call matrix notes. Now, here you are making more efforts to organize the material. So either you may be doing a chart to organize the information in a proper positions, or you may create a grid or some boxes, some tables, so that or you may, for instance, decide to configure the material into a 2x2 matrix or 3x3 matrix or 2x3 matrix, whatever it is, right? So you are making effort to organize the notes in a manner that makes the most logical sense to you. So this is what they call matrix notes, and this is the kind of notes that we will be giving a lot of emphasis to in this video. Because again, as you would have guessed, it's the matrix notes, what they call matrix notes. That's not a term that is used much anymore, but those kinds of notes that were most effective. Anyway, now let's give some attention to how they were taking notes. So were the students taking notes just during the lecture or the study session? So that's what they call encoding. Now, encoding may seem a very fancy, complicated term. Essentially, what they mean is writing down as you are listening to the lecture, writing down as you are learning. That is what they mean by encoding. So as you are listening, you are taking down your notes. That is encoding. And you may take down notes in different forms. You may do the encoding, what they call encoding, either in conventional format of notes, or in linear format of notes, or in the matrix format of notes. But you are doing a live note taking session, right? So, for instance, if you are watching this video, you could be taking your own notes. You doesn't mean that you won't pause the video. You can pause the video and then catch up on your notes and then replay the video, but you are essentially doing the note-taking process. You are engaged in the note-taking process. That's what they mean by encoding. Okay. The next category, again, they have these odd names, but what they call the second category is called encoding plus storage. Again, storage, by storage they are not necessarily meaning that where you store your notes, whether it's on a computer or on some shelf. They are not talking about that kind of storage. They are talking about your mental storage. So essentially what they are talking about is, after taking notes, are you reviewing the notes? Are you revisiting them? So it is not just enough, as I was mentioning before, that you write down the key points, but it is important that you look at them again. And when you do that, you will remember things better. So that's what they're talking about. Putting the effort. So first point was making the effort of taking notes. Second point is the point of taking notes and then revisiting the notes. When you revisit the notes, you may make modifications again, but that's what they are talking about. And the third category of notes is what they call external storage. So again, in simple words, it means borrowed notes. So did you do the note taking yourself, or did you borrow someone else's notes, photocopied it and kept it, right? So that would be external storage, where you are using borrowed notes. So this external storage, or what I would call borrowed notes in very simple terms, this is really intriguing, you realize, because it means they are not just evaluating the quality of the notes. They are also scrutinizing the note-taking process, right? So encoding means, are you engaged in note-taking? Second point, encoding plus storage, means, are you engaged in note-taking, and along with that, do you revisit those notes? Do you revise those notes? And third is, did you do the note-taking yourself, or did you just borrow notes from your friends, classmates? And this is really interesting, primarily because what we are evaluating not just the quality of the notes, like the notes that you borrowed from your friend or maybe from your professor. Some professors do share their notes, right? I don't. I have a policy of not sharing my notes. I ask my students to prepare their own notes, and you will get insights about why I do that, primarily from this point. So even if somebody has prepared great quality notes, but you didn't prepare those notes, you just borrowed it and are using it, is it as effective as when you do your own note taking? That's the question that they are asking. And so what is it that they find? These are the main findings of the study. So the table, it provides the mean scores of the different experimental groups that they had, right? So encoding is the group that was taking notes actively. Encoding plus storage is the group that was encoding plus storage was the group that was taking notes and also revisiting it. External storage is borrowed notes. So these were the three external experimental groups. And they also had a control group. Control group did not take any notes. And so all these participants, whether they were in the experimental groups or in the control group, they had to take two tests later on. One is cued recall, means how well could you recall the information that was presented to you in the lecture, right? So it is testing your memory of the materials. And synthesis, so they also test for synthesis. Synthesis essentially means how well have you understood the material really well? Have you been able to synthesize the material? Meaning, have you been able to integrate, combine all the unrelated information that was presented to you in the lecture, and have you been able to make sense of it, right? How well have you been able to synthesize that material? If you have done it well, then you would understand the material really well. And not just that, you would be able to come up with even new insights because you have synthesized the material really well. So these are the two dependent variables. And they had those tests on which they were doing their measurements. So first thing, let's focus on the cued recall column. In other words, the memory. The control group that was not taking any notes, their score was 13.33. Now, in comparison to the other groups, you can see mostly, except for some exception here, conventional nodes in the encoding category, you typically saw the people who were taking notes doing much better, or even for those who had done borrowed notes, they were doing much better in performance than those who were not taking notes, right? And we see the same also with respect to synthesis of the material. Again, we do see some exceptions, especially in the conventional node category here, but otherwise, when you take notes, you tend to do better, both with respect to recall of information as well as synthesis of the material. Now, but where do we see in recall, where do we see the highest recall? We see it encoding plus storage, right? So where you took the notes, and not just took the notes, but you revisited those notes. So the overall average was 24.21, but within that also, if you go closer, the conventional nodes and linear nodes, the results were not as great as matrix nodes. Again, you now remember what matrix nodes are, where you have organized material based on your own logic, based on what made the most sense to you instead of just following the linear fashion. So, and especially when it comes to the effect on synthesis, the effect is huge. So 8.38 compared to 6 or 5. So the matrix nodes in the encoding plus storage category, the results were really high. So again, you could argue this is a very old study, and do we see the same pattern now? And it turns out to be the case. Yes, we in fact see much stronger effects now, because when this study was published, the methods of evaluating recall synthesis, they were not as streamlined. Now we have much more valid and reliable ways of measuring these things. So the effects over the years actually have magnified. They have gotten stronger. So now what we will do is we will go through the kind of note-taking that I am going to promote in this class. It's what is generally called mind mapping. Okay, there are other terms that can be used for it, and there have been other terms that people use for it. And I am using the term mind map in a fairly generic way. But some key aspects of mind mapping is that you are presenting the material in a visual format, right? Okay, it is not all text. It is something that we are presenting in a visual format. By the way, this is not something that I prepared. This mind map that you are seeing, it's not a mind map that I prepared. I just pulled it from Google Images. Okay, so again, this may not be a perfect mind map in terms of how things have been organized, but whosoever created this mind map did it based on what made the most sense to that particular person. Right, right. And again, this does not mean that any mind map will work. No, it's about some mind maps can be better than others. For instance, here, so this is a mind map of mind map. So benefits of mind mapping. It helps you get an overview of things. It's easy to memorize the material that is presented. It's simple, fast, and fun. Well, simple and fun, yes, not necessarily fast. So that would be incorrect. But these are some of the benefits that are listed here in the mind map. So it also helps with planning projects, goals, strategies. So, well, if it helps with planning, that could also be considered as a benefit, right? So anyway, they have made an arrow planning how it then provides the benefits. It helps with creativity. That's a benefit too. So yeah, maybe if I were doing the mind map, maybe I would put in the center not just mind mapping but benefits of mind mapping, and then there would be different branches and sub branches. So it helps with productivity, it helps with creativity, it helps with collaboration, more effective collaboration, and so on and so forth. But in any case, you can see that when information is presented this way, it is not just good to look at, because all may not have great artistic skills. And by the way, there are lots of software that allows you to do this, and there are plenty of free software too. So there is something called, I think, Freeplane, and something else I'm forgetting. But I have for a while I used to use those software, but I have stopped using software. Now when I'm doing mind map, I just use the traditional pen and paper method, or I use my iPad sometimes also. But because I have the stylus on the iPad, so, or whatever, the Apple Pen, then I use my physical writing process to create mind maps. I'm not as particular about it being clean and neat as opposed to the process of writing and creating those connections. That's what I have found gives the greatest benefit. But I think I'm digressing. So this mind map that you see here, imagine I present the same information. Actually, I just rewrote the same material in form of a linear mind map, or in a textual information. By the way, this is not mind map. The same information that you saw in the mind map here, when I present it in textual format, there is definitely more information here, but it is much more difficult to understand and retain the material, right? But in the previous figure, you are not making the effort of defining everything. Innovation, what exactly we mean by innovation, you are not defining, but you are just writing single words or maybe short phrases, and maybe even putting in some icons to help you recognize and remember those points really better. But in just one snapshot, you are getting the essence of the entire mind mapping process, the benefits that come from it. When the same information is presented in textual format, you have to go through each of those points carefully, and you will not remember, you will not be able to understand that material well. So the point is, we should be using mind maps. And so your initial notes could look like this, but then you should make the effort of converting this information into something more of a visual format, which then will give you greater insights, as well as this will help you remember and make more new connections about the different aspects of the concept that you are studying. So let's quickly go through a few other mind maps, because I'm preparing this video for my stress management class. Here's a mind map. Again, I didn't prepare this. This is from the internet. We could disagree about some of the points, but this is just an example. Stress caused by stressors, internal, external. Symptoms could be emotional, could be muscular, and general discomfort. There are other symptoms too, but anyway. So the types of stress, it could be acute, it could be chronic, it could be episodic. So you can see, so it's a fairly, and the source of the stress could be real, perceived, and that could actually have been connected to the stressors really well too. But nonetheless, you can see it's a fairly good mind map, and it helps you get a broad overview of this stress topic really well. And some parts haven't been detailed yet, so response to stress, but that could again be detailed. So this is an example of a mind map, and you could prepare your own mind maps, right? So again, this is one more that I pulled up from the internet. So this is not mine again. So about stress management, how do you manage stress? Sleep, exercise, nutrition, connecting with people, manage your emotions, and managing toxic elements, all that stuff. So different categories, and and some specific sub branches to help you gain greater insights about what they mean. Again, these are not perfect mind maps. It could be improved, definitely. There's a lot of missing information here. But these are some good examples of mind maps. So, by the way, stress management is such a broad topic, right? Like it's the entire semester worth of material that. So naturally, when they are putting that topic into a mind map, it will be not as detailed. But within these different subtopics, let's say within sleep, there is so much of information that could go in. Within the topic of managing your emotions, there's so much of topic that could go in. Within the subtopic of connect or in relationships, there's so much of information that could go in. So because I have separate lectures for all these different topics, and then all the wealth of information that goes into each topic, you could have separate mind maps for them, right? But that will help you understand and assimilate the materials presented in this class better. Here's again pulled up from the internet, a mind map of the brain. It's very simplistic, but some of the main parts: cerebrum, cerebellum, brainstem, diencephalon, and the different subparts that you. So the anatomy of the brain, which I covered in this class, which was a fairly complex topic, you can imagine you could have prepared a mind map of it, and that would have actually helped you understand and retain the material much better. By the way, this is a mind map of the brain again, but this is highly detailed, and this is something that you can purchase. It turns out it was some, I think, $39 or $40 worth, where you get a big poster, but it has the details of different parts of the brain and all the things they function. But I would say, this is not a very good mind map, because again, you can see there's too much of text in the side, right? So mind map is not about packing in a lot of text. You should have the keywords there, which should be able to help you remember the material. So that's the key thing in mind maps. Nonetheless, it gives you a different way of doing mind maps. Obviously, because this has been done professionally, so it is very clean. Clean in terms of the figures are very clean, tidy, professionally done. Um, but if you are using any software, you can easily insert images, right? You can insert the images of a brain diagram and then manually, physically draw arrows to point to different parts and the quick function or the main diseases, main problems associated with different parts, right? So those things are something that you could do even if you aren't creating the images yourself. That's exactly what I did also you would see in my PowerPoint presentation, right? I had the brain's picture and then created some arrows, bubbles, where I explained different parts of the brain. But these are examples of mind maps. So, because I have now that I've given you an overview of mind maps, let's quickly discuss are mind maps as beneficial as they seem to be. So this was a study that was published in 2015, and so these were nursing students. So the professor teaches mind maps, how to make mind maps to the nursing students, and then later on gets their opinion about mind maps. And you see that she gets really great, very positive responses on the efficacy of mind maps. So 60% plus 60% people strongly agreed that mind map was easy to learn. It's not very difficult. 60%, so the scale was strongly agree, strongly disagree. So 60 plus 30, 90% of the people either agree or strongly agree that it is fairly easy to learn. Mind map is useful to describe the concept of critical thinking. Assists with critical thinking. Again, you see the percentages are really high. Provides a wider perspective on critical thinking. Helped me put my ideas in some type of logical order. Enhanced my creativity. It's a useful learning strategy. Will help me in my role as a nurse. I had sufficient time to complete this activity. So it does take up some time. But again, you see that very few people were either agreeing or strongly disagreeing with these statements. Majority combined, about 90% of the participants were either strongly agreeing or agreeing with these statements. So the reason I thought I will share this study with you is because mind map, even though it looks complex, even though it seems complex, it just requires some amount of time investment. But it's a time really well spent that you can get benefit from, something that will help you in a big way. So at least for the purposes of this presentation, this is the last study that I'm going to share with you. And this is a very latest paper that was published in 2022. And this is a meta-analytic study. And what is a meta-analytic study? It is an empirical paper, meaning it's a statistical analysis of all the other studies that have been done on the topic so far. So it is not just a narrative review of the past studies. Rather, it takes the findings from all the other studies, combines those correlations, and helps get correlations for the population, meaning for, different studies may have different results. A meta-analytic study gives the overall effect sizes of these different papers. Okay, so without again going into too much of detail, what do they find? They find that mind mapping is more effective than the traditional methods of note taking, right? The traditional linear way of note taking. So when you do mind maps, it's, by the way, mind maps can be even a flow chart. Even that can be mind map. Mind map I use in a very broad sense of visual representation of material. So, by the way, they found the effects on all kinds of learning outcomes. So, not just memory, but understanding and all that stuff. We will go through those things in a bit. But interesting thing is, mind maps were even more helpful to the students who were not doing as well. So, lower grade students found greater benefit than those students who are getting higher grades. Okay, and they also found that mind maps helped across all disciplines, helped students across all disciplines, irrespective of which discipline you were. But the effect sizes, meaning mind maps helped the most to students who were from the STEM disciplines, the science, technology, engineering, mathematics. So, because those are in those disciplines, you are studying very complex topics, and that's where mind maps were extremely helpful. So the effect sizes were really strong. All the positive effects that we have talked about so far, the effect sizes were stronger in the STEM disciplines. So whenever you are studying a complex topic, you will benefit even more if you use mind maps. If it is a very easy topic, again, because mind maps do take up some of your time, so maybe you can skip not doing a mind map. But if it is fairly complex, if it is something that you want to understand really well, if you want to gain greater insights about that topic, then it will benefit you a lot if you create mind maps. So how do mind maps help? What is the mechanism? Why is it so effective? So what we see is that it helps with brainstorming, right? Because of the visual format, you are being able to see connections between seemingly different topics. We are visual creatures first, and textual creatures much later. If you look at the way we evolved, we learned language much later, right? But even before language developed, we as primitive human beings were navigating the world that we lived in. We were finding cues, and that's in the environment, that's how we were navigating the world. So our visual medium is extremely strong. That is something that through which we learn most effectively, as well as we tend to remember, understand things much better. So because of that, even the ideas come out much better when we are putting things in pictorial form. And these connections that we are making, this helps us with come up with even newer ideas. Okay. In fact, this reminds me, I probably should have added one of those photos. You would have seen many movies where there will be a detective, he or she would have a wall because he's trying to solve this murder or whatever, or the serial murder case. So he would have put these sticky notes on the wall and trying to make connections. Why do they do that? Why do detectives do that? Primarily because, again, it helps them see connections that they hadn't seen if they had just only text material, if they were only writing reports, if they were only studying the reports. They would not be able to see the gaps or these connections. So that's the power of mind maps. So it also helps because you are structuring the material and presenting it in a visually engaging way. So that is the reason it is important that you use only keywords, not too much of textual information. Add images, add different colors if you can. But even if you cannot add different colors, let's say if you just have one regular blue pen, or if you're doing it in a pencil, that's fine too. But colors help distinguish different things. in a way because you can color code things. So organizing the material, that is something, because you are organizing it, right? The author, the professor, they would have organized things in a way that made the most sense to them. So, but you are now organizing the material in your head. You are either doing it through some hierarchy or some logical structure. Plus, remember, you are making connections with the things that you have learned in the past, with things that you have learned in other classes, or maybe with things that you have learned outside of school. So when you make those connections in your mind map, then it becomes your own. It becomes something, it becomes like a living document that it comes alive. It becomes something that makes it extremely engaging. And that's how you get those insights. So organizing and the effort that you put in to organize thoughts in this radial kind of structure. And another important thing, this organization also helps to make complex topics, you're putting them in manageable chunks, right? So if it is a very complex topic, like, for instance, stress management is too broad. Yes, you could have a, broad level, like a bird's eye view level of mind map for stress management. Then for the subtopics, you could have another mind map. So for sleeping, you could have another mind map. Within sleep, you could, if we do, we can have separate mind map for meditation. We could, for different subtopics, depending on how complex it is, you essentially, by doing these separate mind maps, you are bringing them to manageable chunks, and it becomes something then easy to assimilate. So again, what they have seen, because it helps in your understanding, you can develop and refine your understanding of the concepts really well. And similar to the first point, that it helps with brainstorming, but beyond brainstorming also, not just coming up with new points, promotes innovative thinking, it promotes creative thinking. You may see connections that you hadn't seen before, and that essentially helps you solve the problems. So even in the organizations, when you're working, it's good to take notes in this mind map kind of format. I hope I sold you on the topic of mind maps really well. In the next video, I will do a quick demonstration on how you could use mind map for some lecture or topic.